I mean, as this whole space develops, so we've got this huge developments going on in cloud, I guess.
Yes.
That seems to be happening. Then we got the kind of distributed computing power, edge computing, and that's just all allowing more and more processing ability. And then within that, suddenly that's allowed, it looks like, this ability to create the internet of, well, assets or money or value or whatever it is. How big a thing is this? Where is Silicon Valley? Because I'm really interested, as you know, in this whole kind of blockchain, crypto, digital assets world, because it's the crossover of my world and your world.
Yes.
It's macro meets Silicon Valley. And it's just, it's fascinating. And how is that movement in the West Coast? Do people see it? Is it a really big thing? Because Andreessen Horowitz seem to be really putting their whole business behind this now. Talk me a bit about this movement that's going on.
It is. You know, what's interesting is that I'm going to answer that on a couple of dimensions. One is that Silicon Valley is definitely an insular place, and it has its own way of thinking about things that, you know, some people call it a bubble, whether it's a financial bubble or a thought bubble or just whatever it is. It's a little different. There was a certain type of person that came out to Silicon Valley in the 80s, 90s, and they came from all over the world. You know, if people were interested in electronics and physical things, like this was geek heaven in the 80s and early 90s, and then it started to become a little bit more commercial and transactional with the internet. But Silicon Valley has its own way of looking at things, and because it became the center of the universe for that kind of development for a while, and actually it still is, it was an interesting thing when the internet hit. I was convinced at the beginning of that the internet would democratize everybody and that the software engineer in Bangladesh would be equal to the one in San Jose because they could get information equally. And that was kind of true. But what ended up happening was as the internet spread, that person in Bangladesh would wake up and say, I should be in Silicon Valley. And they would get on a plane and move. And so that network sort of reached out, touched everybody, and then sucked all the assets into Silicon Valley because everybody wanted to be commercially productive. And then it imploded. And then some people went back home. And so Silicon Valley goes through those waves, but there's a high concentration of the more aggressive people that are willing to try new things here. And that's become its own sort of, you know, ecosystem. That said, I think what's happened in the last 8 or 10 years in particular is that we had sort of like, you know, in that movie, there's one of the original Star Trek movies where Spock goes back there. He goes into the nuclear reactor to take out the thing, you know, and then they have to bring him back to life because he dies. So there's the Genesis Project. Right. And then there's this like green shoot that shoots out of the ground and it goes everywhere. And there's green. So technology is kind of like that now. You had this like concentration in Silicon Valley. And over the last 8 or 10 years, the opportunity to fund and build and create companies worldwide has expanded like crazy. And I think it's a couple of dimensions. One is that in the earlier days of Silicon Valley, it was all about miniaturization of hardware devices and engineers selling to engineers, things that would make their machines faster and cheaper and better. And the applications layer wasn't kind of the main thing. And now we've moved to this world where technology is affecting everything. And it's allowing people like a Mark Zuckerberg to start a company in a dorm room at Harvard. That one moved to Silicon Valley, but now there's people that don't move anymore. And, you know, whether it's immigration restrictions, cost of living, what have you, I've been very successful in funding companies like Canva out in, you know, in Perth, Australia. It started. It's there in Sydney now. But that company's now worth, you know, $500 million, and it's been profitable for 3 years. They're about 18 months behind Zoom in P&L and margin structure, and same P&L margin structure, but size is about 18 months behind. Or Safety Culture is another company that just raised $1 billion in Australia. Treasure Data, which SoftBank acquired, I started that one out of Tokyo. And there's so many opportunities now that are springing up, and the fabled Silicon Valley unicorn isn't just in Silicon Valley anymore, and there are unicorns everywhere. And I think that's just starting.
So what is because you got involved in the whole Bitcoin business early on. Talk us through your journey of that, because that's
what a crazy thing that I never thought would become what it became. Okay, so in the 90s, I was on the board of a company that went public called 8x8. And one of our board members was the chief scientist of Real Networks. And he introduced me to a good friend of his who was the chief technologist, CTO of Real Networks, because he thought we'd be, snowboard buddies. And we did. We kite surfed together, we snowboard together. And around that time, I think around year 2000, 99 or 2000, I can't remember the exact year. His name's Philip Rosedale. Philip told me, Bill, I'm going to build that science fiction novel, Snow Crash, in real life. And first, I hadn't read that book yet. So I said, well, what's Snow Crash? And if you don't know what it is, it's a science fiction novel by Neal Stephenson that describes a digital world. And this was written in the 80s, where the protagonist drops down his computer, opens the screen, drops in. And he's got a virtual character representing him that goes around, and they have a ninja sword. The characters have ninja swords, and every once in a while you get in a fight. And if you lose and you get your head cut off, you get timed out and you're not in the world anymore. And towards the end of the book, the physical and virtual marry, and the character gets killed and the guy in real life dies. So it's kind of, first life and second life merge. So Philip built Second Life. And it became this thing, this amazing world where people would create a digital representation of themselves and wander around in an unstructured environment. And when it was first launched, people didn't really know what to do because it wasn't a structured game. You just show up. And I was sitting in front of the Paragon Bar in San Francisco with him around 2000, 2001 when it launched. And I said, Philip, we should start an economy. I said, if you think about what is Las Vegas, there was nothing there. There's nothing's made there. It's just like a bunch of sand. I said, if you put 10 people in a circle and you put one poker chip into the system and said, pass it to the right 1 million times a year, everybody would have $1 million a year of income. And as it's moving around, you could peel stuff off and build a casino, build a resort, and you have an economy. So we launched, or Philip, I should say, launched the Linden Dollar. And that became, and I took the character, my name was Alan Greenspan Gollum in Second Life. So we had this sort of money supply. We had universal basic income. And so all the netizens of Second Life would get a little stipend every month. And then
that would create money that therefore people got distributed money, and that they would spend it would create velocity of money, and they've created an economy.
That's what happened. It was like Las Vegas, right? And it was crazy because the people would set up banks. There were Ponzi schemes. People would collect other people's money and offer interest with nothing really to invest in, and get more money and pay interest. Everything that happened in the Wild West days of banking in the U.S. happened in Second Life, and it was just nuts. But it was a fantastic experience. And then when the Bitcoin white paper came out, somebody sent it to me. I don't remember the date, but it sat in my in basket for a while because I didn't really know what it was. And then at some point in 2010, I read it, and I went to bitcoin.org and I downloaded some software and I started running a miner. And
why did you take this? I understand you kind of understood that digital money has a future,
yes.
Right? That was the thing, that the digital life and the real life can blend, and people are living two lives. Okay, I get that. That's very revolutionary, and people still haven't caught up with that yet.
Yes.
That's how kids are living now.
Yeah.
But why that white paper? Do you go, okay, this makes sense, I'm going to start mining? Most people go, oh, that's interesting. And
the phrase that caught my attention was peer-to-peer currency. And it was more the peer-to-peer than it was a currency at the time. So around 1999, 2000, so back in the mid-90s, I started an ISP. And I set up some routers in Taiwan. I had one of the first commercially owned ISPs. It became a bunch of data centers. It was Goldman, Morgan, and Solomon ended up taking it public. I with a team acquired AT&T Hong Kong, and it became a company called iAsiaWorks, led by the then CEO of AT&T Hong Kong, and it became a public company. And so here I had this data center business with all these lines, and I could see clearly in my head the world was had moved from mainframes to minis to PCs to blade servers distributed around the world. And it was a peer-to-peer fabric, effectively, of computational devices. So I was experimenting at that time with peer-to-peer computing. And I also set up this little entity to experiment with called iFrog.com. And I had some coders that built a peer-to-peer content distribution network. It was the idea was kind of like Akamai, to take video streams, and instead of having to pay expensive bandwidth across submarine cables across the ocean, you could have it go over once and sit in the peer nodes, and each one would spread it so that it would be at lower cost. So I was just into that type of technology at the time, and the Second Life architecture in the beginning also was going to use blade servers in a way where if you joined Second Life, your computer would be attached to a blade server in a pod, and your computational device, your PC, would generate a little piece of real estate in Second Life. So the idea was to have many, many, many people on contributing their compute power to build the world so that the company itself didn't have to. And so I think just because I was interested in those techniques and working on them and building some things and experimenting, when I saw peer-to-peer currency, I read it and I just thought, wow, this is fascinating. This is kind of cool. It totally made sense to me that you could have a world of people out there all contributing to a common goal that was a computationally based thing, whatever it was. And this just happened to be a currency. And so I lit up this miner, and then it was computationally intensive on an old PC I had that was running, some other stuff, and it would crash every once in a while. So on Thanksgiving weekend of 2010, and I do all my building on holidays. So if you follow me on Instagram, you'll see like robots on 4th of like Memorial Day weekend. I built a robot, and like last 4th of July, I built like a little LED red, white, and blue flashing thing. I do things on holidays. And Thanksgiving of 2010, so 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, I decided to switch from mining to possibly buying, and I tweeted something that's still out there that was something like, anyone else using peer-to-peer currency Bitcoin.org, because I wanted to find other people. And then I ended up meeting this kid whose father was a kite surfer. And this kid named Nico Poonen was mining in Finland. And his apartment was full of machines, basically mining. And I got to know him and bought some Bitcoin from him. And over the years, he and some other people in the open source community got together and pooled their assets and learned how to go from laptops to programming graphics cards to programming FPGAs, field programmable gate arrays. And then they wanted to do a semiconductor chip, like a hardcore ASIC that ran the Bitcoin protocol. And having been a chip designer by background, when he first approached me as, a young kid, he's no education in that space. I was like, there's no way you can do this. But he and his open source buddies found some programs to design silicon, and they came up with the design. And I looked at it, I was like, this could work. And so I ended up writing a check with some friends, the inventor of Google Maps, employee 13 of Facebook, the head of infrastructure of Facebook. We funded a silicon chip that became the main computational device at Bitfury. So that's how I got involved with what was for a while the world's largest Bitcoin mining operation.
And what did you see in those days? What did you think was going to happen with this Bitcoin thing? And I'd love to see where you think it's going now. Because this is where our worlds collide as well, because there seems to be an accelerant around us with what's going on in the world. So what did you see then, and how's your evolution of thought process changed?
Well, when I read the white paper and then I started to understand the Byzantine generals problem, if you've ever read...
Do you want to explain that to some people? We've had it once on before, but I think it's very useful to explain to people.
Yeah, so at a very high level, okay, so I look at Bitcoin as both primarily a store of value, and it's useful in some levels of transactions, but there are improvements that need to be made to a bunch of things to make it high volume. And so if it's going to be a store of value like gold, then scarcity is quite important. How do you know that there's a limited quantity, and how do you identify all the little pieces of Bitcoin that make up the universe of Bitcoin? And so there's a set of algorithms that were really based on history, where if you had a war, a bunch of Byzantine generals that were being attacked or in some battle, and you had this communications, not even a grid, because you have people like running around by foot, with little scrolls messaging. How do you know how to communicate with all of them in a distributed fashion and make sure that they're kind of in sync, and that the instructions that are going to each general are authentic and that you should really follow them? Kind of an interesting problem when you're leading a troop and you're going to go into battle against all these other people and you don't know, am I being tricked? Is this real? Is it not real? So there's an algorithm that was developed that outlines the way the communication happens between those things, to make sure that it's sort of fault tolerant, and that with enough nodes, you can tell that something's authentic. And so the algorithm that was designed, that is imputed in having a bunch of nodes that run the Bitcoin program, run them all together in a way that you can verify transactions, so that if you and I have, if you wanted to send me part of a coin and you sent it to me, how do I know, like that Byzantine messenger, that was real, it happened, it's indelible, it wasn't fake, and that everyone can know that without having to have watched it? So that set of algorithms is kind of coded into the software that has all these different nodes that you hear about as the hashing program, and the verification of transactions that occur in the Bitcoin blockchain. And that, the blockchain, to simplify that, it's a chain of blocks of information. So every 10 minutes or so, it's not exactly 10 minutes, but it's sort of roughly 10 minutes to every 10 minutes, all the little movements of coins around the world that are sort of queued up, there's a wrapper put around that, and that's a block. And then that's stuck on the chain. So over a period of time, anyone can look at that chain and see, Raul sent Bill this tiny amount of Bitcoin at this time on this date, and now that unit sits with him. And then I can then move it anytime, so that all of those transactions in the world all the time are being recorded and stored in multiple locations, and no one can replace it. And it's indelible. So there's a tracking system. It's back to this data science thing.